Meiosis. Meiosis is cell division that results in gametes. Gametes are eggs or sperm. And so here's an egg, which is huge, and lots of little sperm that are trying to fertilize it. So meiosis is necessary for sexual reproduction. You got to make eggs and sperm before you make a baby by sexual reproduction. Okay, so let's talk about the types of reproduction. Many organisms reproduce sexually, like these Shetland sheep. Aren't they beautiful? And other organisms reproduce asexually. So bacteria, we talked about binary fission last time around. That's a type of asexual reproduction done by prokaryotes. And here's a plant, and you can see it sending off runners. And so right now, these are all the same organisms. But if this were broken or cut off, they would be two different organisms, and they'd have reproduced asexually. Here's some fungi. They can also send out their hyphae underground and produce other organisms, especially if, once the hyphae are separated. More, I don't know, coral maybe? This is a hydra, and this is doing something called budding. And so here's the parent organism, and it's making its offspring here, but it's genetically the same. It didn't use egg and sperm for this. It just used mitosis and grew a new organism, which will eventually break off. And here's a Daphnia water flea, and apparently they can go do it both ways, sexually and asexually. And there are actually some sharks who do asexual reproduction, which is totally bizarre, and some Komodo dragons. Scientists have actually seen or have evidence that Komodo dragons occasionally reproduce asexually, though usually they reproduce sexually. So some organisms can do both, and some just do one. Some types just do one or the other. So here's what an asexual population of Komodo dragons might look like. And so what you want to think about for this is, and this probably isn't an asexual population. They're probably, usually Komodo dragons use sexual reproduction, but let's just assume for a minute that they're asexual. So what I want you to do is think about the problems that a group like this might have. So they're all genetically identical. And so the idea here is if there's some, if the environment doesn't change, then they're just fine. But if there's some new environmental problem, pressure, I think that's a better word for it, then if one of them has a hard time with it, then so will all the others. So for example, if there's a virus that gets into the population and this one's susceptible to it, well, then they're all susceptible to it because they have the DNA, the same DNA. So they're going to have a little bit more difficult of a time when the population is exposed to some kind of selection pressure. Maybe it's a new predator, maybe the temperature is changing in the environment, maybe it's a virus. So we just said that actually. So what are the benefits of asexual reproduction to an organism? And so I'm making the kids do this with whiteboards in class, but for you, you can just pause and do it. So the benefits is that you don't need to find a partner, so therefore it's quicker. Not only is it quicker, but it's less dangerous. So for example, there are fireflies that the males will shine their light, and males of one species will shine their light a certain way, and males of another species will shine their light a different way, and the females will respond by shining their light back, and so then the males will come down and mate with the females. Now if a female is hungry and it sees a male of a different species, it might shine its light like the male of that species, and then when the male lands, she eats him up. So finding a partner can be dangerous. If you think about frogs croaking at night, they're croaking to find a mate, but all the predators can hear them as well. So anyway, it saves energy if you don't need to find a partner. It's more reliable, so all you need is yourself. It's often faster because you don't need to find a mate. And another thing is that the parent does not need to produce or take care of an offspring that has only half of its DNA. So you're producing an offspring that's 100% the same as you, and so you're not investing all of your energy into someone else's baby. So it seems like asexual reproduction is the way to go. However, there's some huge benefits to a sexually reproducing population. So what are the benefits of a sexually reproducing population? So pause this, think about it, and now I'm going to talk about it a little bit. So if you take a look at these Shetland sheep, you can see the first thing that strikes me really is that they have different colors. And so the colors might make a difference. And especially you want to think about this with let's say even a natural population. But anyway, so they're variable. They're different from each other. Maybe this one has really fuzzy wool, and maybe that one's wool is really thick. And so, and maybe that one's wool is thinner, and they have, I don't know, less fur per square inch or whatever. If the environment gets hotter, that one will do better. And if the environment gets colder, then the one with the thicker fur would do better. This one might be really resistant to fungi, and so its feet will do well in a moist environment. And this one might not be like that, but maybe it's really resistant to viruses, and maybe that one does well with bacterial infections. Maybe this one is camouflaged in the woods, and so predators won't find it as easily, or whatever. So the idea here is that there's variation among these organisms. So sexual reproduction produces variation among offspring, and that is enormous. It makes it worth having to find a mate. So the babies are all a little bit different from each other, and it's not just that they're different in color, it's that they're different, their immune systems might be different, how quickly they respond to a threat might be different. So it's important when the environment changes. So if you're doing really well in your environment and all of your babies are exactly like you and the environment never changes, then you'll be fine. But the thing is, the environment always changes because you're always going to have a new virus or a new type of fungus that comes into the area. Sometimes there's a new predator. Sometimes the temperature gets hotter or colder or whatever. So if your babies are a little different from each other and a little different from you, then at least some of them will probably survive. So if it gets colder, for example, the sheep with the thicker coats will survive and reproduce better. However, if it gets hotter, the sheep with the thinner coats will survive and reproduce better. So apply that to every kind of pressure, not just the temperature getting hotter or colder, but viruses, fungi, whatever. So what other variations besides wool thickness might be present in this population? So we mentioned a bunch. There could be stuff like thickness of hooves and how well they do with a moist environment and fungal infections. Could be which one has an immune system that fights off viruses very well. So what causes variation? So the topic of this unit, meiosis, is really to understand what causes variation among sexually reproducing organisms. And there are three things. One of them is two parents. And so that's one of the ideas that you probably already knew. If you have two parents, then you're going to have DNA from, half of each of their DNA. And so that already makes you different. The other two things are things to do with meiosis. One is called independent assortment. So you want to write that down. And the other is called crossing over. So this one you probably already knew. And these two we're going to talk about now. They have to do with meiosis and how the DNA gets separated when you make egg and sperm. So the first one is two parents. Each parent donates half of the DNA to the offspring. Independent assortment and crossing over both occur when gametes, like eggs or sperm, are produced, which happens during meiosis. And we are almost ready to study meiosis. Hip, hip. Roman numeral 2, a little more background on chromosomes before we look at meiosis. Actually, I think this is a good place to stop.